The whole idea is that there is no neutrality. I can tell you that there are some countries that are doing good offices. Kuwait and Oman, for example. They're trying to exert good offices to have aid come in at one point or another. What they're trying to do is support in issuing basically a decision-making process that will help or enable stop the war in Gaza, but they cannot do anything on their own. Unless you have a collective action from 22 Arab states or 57 Muslim states, nothing will happen. And nothing has happened so far.
Hello and welcome to DawnNews English. The Middle East is on high alert following the assassinations of senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders. Joining us today is Leila Hatoum as we discuss the potential of a wider conflict, the war in Gaza, the involvement of the United States, and the silence of the Arab states amid all this. So, given the high-profile assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and that too shortly after the inauguration ceremony of the Iranian president with over 110 foreign delegates present, is it even possible that Iran will not retaliate?
Hello, and thank you for having me again. I always enjoy basically your interviews. And no, I don't think that Iran will not retaliate, because Iran directly went out and said that they will retaliate with a series of operations against the Israeli entity and its assets that will be painful to the Israeli entity. So they will do a series of painful operations against the Israeli entity. That was the first vouch. And then they warned the US earlier today that at one point or another, if the US takes part in defending the Israelis and attacking the Iranians or the axis of resistance, then Iran will, they didn't say Iran will do it, but they said every single US asset and interest in the region, including in the GCC, will be a target. So we do expect Iran to carry out that threat because they always basically met what they promised in the past. They vouched to retaliate to the Israeli aggression against the diplomatic building that's adjoined to the embassy, the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And we saw them, they took their time, they prepared a retaliation, and they did retaliate. Now, the retaliation will be a series of operations, so it's not going to be one. And remember, Iran is not acting alone. So Iran will be retaliating to something that happened that breached its own sovereignty on its own land. But there are other retaliations also from other parties within the axis of resistance that the Israeli entity will have to wait for, because the Israelis did assassinate one of the top commanders within Hezbollah, the man who was behind the precision missiles program for Hezbollah, Haj Fuad Shukr, also known as Haj Mohsen. And they also targeted Syria. They targeted Hudaydah before that in Yemen. And the Americans, at one point or another, they targeted the Iraqi resistance inside Iraq, all within the same span, within the same month. The last three happened within the same 12 hours. So there will be a series of attacks against the Israelis from the axis of resistance, but the Iranians will be carrying a large chunk of it as well, because they did promise a series of attacks on their own.
Okay, so I have two questions, but we'll first address the United States. So the US is already aligned with Israel. But what scenarios do you think might lead to a more direct US military involvement in this conflict, and such as a significant, escalation in hostilities or like a perceived threat to regional stability? Second one is, like you mentioned, that it won't just be Iran, but it would also be the other resistance forces, and including Hezbollah. Do they realize that Israel might be baiting them into a larger conflict that could potentially, draw in other regional actors, including the US, and potentially lead to like a wider war?
Fair enough. You have to understand that the first assassination that happened against Beirut's southern suburbs that targeted one of main leaders within Hezbollah, it happened with an American green light. The Israelis went out and said that they had ran the operation by the Israelis. They had informed them of it. And the Israelis had informed the Americans of it, and the Americans had given them the green light. Shortly after the Israelis targeted and assassinated Haj Fuad Shukr in Beirut's southern suburbs, which is the stronghold of Hezbollah, the US Secretary of Defense went out to say, we stand by Israel and its security, and any attack by Hezbollah in retaliation to what happened we will defend Israel, or we'll support Israel. This is how they put it. Now, if you think about it, that means the Americans are ready to take direct part in the attack against regional powers over here, axis of resistance, which means that the Americans, by giving the green light, they already knew what they were signing to. It's the Americans behind this whole war since October 7. When you push another country or give it the green light to commit genocide and continue to commit genocide without stopping it, and you continue to feed it with arms and funding, and they always do that to the Israelis, they give them funding and arms at the same time, that means continue with your war, it doesn't matter. So they are the ones who are feeding into this war. Now they want to escalate it for electoral purposes because their economy is down. That's something else. But they gave the green light to the Israelis to do this kind of an attack that will create an escalation in the situation. And we just like a few moments ago, Hezbollah Secretary General Said Hassan Nasrallah finished his speech. He had said, this will take us to a new phase. There will be no red lines. And basically, the battle has become an open battle. So we have entered the phase of escalation. There will be retaliation. The Israelis know that, and the Americans know that. So we are expecting an escalation at one point or another. We do expect the Americans to take part in it. And once the Americans take part in it, the whole region will be dragged in it. Because think about it this way. You have 10 Russian battalions stationed in South Syria along the Golan Heights borders. And then you have Iran. And then you have the axis of resistance. All of those, if the Americans interfere, Iran will interfere because they threaten the Americans, don't take part, otherwise your assets in the region will be hit. And the moment that they interfere and Syria is dragged into it, the Russians will have to interfere as well because they have the defense strategy with the Syrians. The Russians also have a defense agreement with the Iranians. So that means we are going to be dragged into a regional war because of the US green light to the Israelis to continue to commit atrocities, war crimes, and assassinations and breaching other countries' sovereignty.
Amid all this, the Arab states have largely been supportive of Israel while trying to stay out of direct conflict. How long do you think that this neutrality is going to last, considering the sentiments on the Arab street, which have been increasingly sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and critical of Israeli actions?
I don't believe any of the Arab or even Muslim states are neutral. You are either with or against. By being silent, you're enabling the other side basically to continue with the genocide. You need to take action, be it economic level, be it military level, be it financial level, it doesn't matter. But we haven't seen that action. We only saw some diplomatic efforts to have or issue a statement somewhere, be it in the United Nations level, on the United Nations level, or basically the Arab League level. We saw some states supporting the Israelis. From day one, when this genocide started against the Palestinians of Gaza, some of the Arab states, and I'm going to name, including Egypt and others, they said they are willing, and basically some of the Palestinians as well, to take part in a task force that will take over and maintain peace in Gaza after this war has ended. That was 9 months ago. They were planning on ruling Gaza and who's going to take part of what. Before the war had even subsided, they didn't think about stopping the war. They were thinking of who's going to rule after that. And you have other Arab states who continue to do trade with the Israelis. You have Islamic states like Turkey, for example, who continue to maintain good relations with the Israelis in terms of diplomatic relations. You have Arab states like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, Turkey, and others who continue to host Israeli diplomatic missions because they have normalized ties with the Israelis. And then you have Turkey and Morocco and others. Turkey is a Muslim state. Morocco is an Arab state. They continue to send food, water, produce all the way to the Israeli entity. That's supporting the Israeli entity. That's enabling the Israelis to continue and persevere to attack the Gazans and kill them. And then you have Jordan at one point or another allowing for its military bases or land to be a stepping stone to go and attack Gaza. The US military base in West Jordan was the launching pad for the US planes that went over and bombarded Gaza at one point in time. And those are not my words, those are the words of Colonel Zaid Salmi of Ansar Allah, aka Houthis, Yemeni armed forces. They monitor the situation. So the whole idea is that there is no neutrality. I can tell you that there are some countries that are doing good offices. Kuwait and Oman, for example. They're trying to exert good offices to have aid come in at one point or another. What they're trying to do is support in issuing basically a decision-making process that will help or enable stop the war in Gaza, but they cannot do anything on their own. Unless you have a collective action from 22 Arab states or 57 Muslim states, nothing will happen. And nothing has happened so far.
We're talking about the United States, and we're also talking about their involvement, direct involvement. So US is now going through an election phase. How do you think the outcome of the upcoming presidential elections impact the trajectory of the Gaza conflict and the broader Middle East, dynamics as well, given differing, foreign policy approaches and stances of Trump and Harris? We know Trump is more direct, but Trump also has closer ties with Israel. Harris, on the other hand, supported majority of Biden's policies.
You have to understand, whoever comes to power, be it Harris or Trump, be it the Democrats or the Republicans, the foreign policy of the US has been drawn for the longest time. It doesn't change. What changes is the way that you execute that policy. The Democrats have a different way than the Republicans in executing that policy. So at the end of the day, the Democrats prefer to do the indirect approach where they have riots, they instigate riots, they instigate other countries, they deplete the resources of resistance movements on the ground, then they move in as heroes to take over. Whereas the Republicans, they're like cowboys. They move directly in with war, bombarding everything, show business, and then this is how they finish it. But the end result and the way that they actually carry it out is always the same when it comes to implementing that. When it comes to that end goal for the foreign policy: war, chaos, take over. And it depends on the place that they have targeted. So Kamala Harris, we saw her immediately after the Israeli assassination of Hash Fuad in Beirut South suburbs. She came out to cap on it for electoral reasons. What did she say? She said, the only way forward is for diplomatic solutions. You just gave the green light for the Israelis. You as Democrats gave the green light for the Israelis to commit that assassination. Then you come out and talk about diplomatic solutions. And then this is how she continued. We support a diplomatic solution. That's the only way forward. However, if there's an attack against the Israelis, we'll always stand with the Israelis. We warn Hezbollah basically not to attack. So what is she trying to tell the US public? I am trying to be diplomatic and we're giving them a leeway. But those axis of resistance, they want to attack Israel and they attacked Israel. So we moved in as saviors and we're saving Israel. And this way she thinks that she's capping on the Israeli vote, basically the Jewish vote in the US, that she's supporting Israel and defending it. She's capping on the vote of those leftist educated milieu that basically wants diplomacy. And she's like, look, we offered them diplomacy. We tried, we're peaceful, etc. But it didn't work out. The other side is bad. And then she's capping on selling the public the reason why they're going to go into an escalation of war. Hezbollah attacked Israel, so we're going to go ahead and take part in this war. So it's 3 birds with 1 stone. This is Kamala Harris. The Republicans, from day one, Trump said that I will support Israel. That's it. Now the outcome, it depends on the outcome of what's going to happen in the region. Remember, every single time the Israelis have an elections, they need a surprise by October because November is the election time, right? So they need a big surprise to mobilize the voters to take part in the voting process with or against a certain party. This war, if it escalates, it's either going to bury the Democrats or basically eliminate the Republicans. And I do believe it's going to bury the Democrats because the public in the US is not that stupid. And they do understand that they were dragged into this war. Not everybody likes Kamala Harris, not even within the Democrats. At one point, if you tell me that they have picked Bernie Sanders, I would have told you like he may not have better chances. And when it comes to the Republicans, they always vote as a herd. It doesn't matter. You don't have to convince them. Give them show business. This is what Donald Trump is really good at. They will go and vote for him. The difference is that the Jewish vote and the Arab vote in the US is going to shift majorly away from the Democrats. Everybody's afraid of Trump, but everybody has seen what the Democrats have done to this region. So I do believe that they made a big mistake. That surprise in October that they were planning for as an escalation in war and they walk in as saviors of Israel is not going to work in their favor. So the other thing is that they need this war to gap the problems with their economy. They keep putting out wrong numbers. Inflation is still high. They still have problems. The interest rate was fixed yesterday at the same historic high at 5.5%. So the whole idea is that economy is bad. There are elections. They need this war. That's why they're pushing for this war, and it's going to bury the Democrats.
Talking about war and elections, the polls within Israel also show that Netanyahu is on the brink. As soon as the war is over, he's out. And I was reading this news yesterday about Israel deliberately killing the peace negotiators. How will there be a peace deal when there are no negotiators left? However, it's very, very interesting that Israel has already admitted to significant losses in Gaza. When it comes to airstrikes, they're very good. But when it comes to battle, they're being defeated by Hamas, which even with the lack of weapons on the side of Hamas. What does this say about the Israeli military's capabilities on engaging Hezbollah?
All right, I'll just touch a little bit on Netanyahu's popularity internally. He has lost majorly. I mean, 2 months back, he was hanging at 30%, 31%, and that's according to the Israeli media's polls, not ours. Now it's dropped more than that because everybody was waiting, including the families of those prisoners of war, the Israeli prisoners of war held by the Palestinian resistance. They were waiting for those negotiations to happen so they can get their people back. And when Netanyahu went to the Congress and he had that fake clap because AIPAC paid for the senators to actually pay and the Congress people to pay for to clap for him, he promised a lengthy war until victory. He didn't promise basically negotiations will happen and we'll get those people back. We'll not get the prisoners of war back. He promised fighting until victory. So that means elongated war. Then he comes back and he kills the chief negotiator, who's the chief of Hamas at one point, the political bureau of Hamas. And that tells you one thing. He is after ending the negotiations. But this is not a surprise to us. I mean, there are generals within the Israeli military, the Israeli occupation forces, that went out several days before Netanyahu's speech and even the day before Netanyahu's speech in the Congress and said Netanyahu does not want the negotiations to happen. He wants a lengthy war in Gaza because that's the only thing that keeps him in power. Now think about it this way. If you have a lengthy war, Netanyahu will continue to use his powers to stay in power. But the moment that war ends, people will go after him and they will put him to trial. The same thing goes for an escalation. An escalation is the last nail in Netanyahu's coffin, but he's cornered and he has nowhere else to go. So he only has basically escalation to go with it. It will be the swift blow to his reign in Israel. That's the first thing. When it comes to the IOF, they've been fighting for almost 10 months now. Not a single victory in sight. They keep hemorrhaging soldiers. They have to recruit mercenaries every now and then. And because they have a lack of soldiers, some of their soldiers have absconded. They left the country. They fled. Some of their soldiers and officers have fled the country. They refused to be part of the conscription. So now they're turning to the right wing in Israel, the Haredim, and trying to force them to come and serve. In the past, they were exempted from serving because they go and worship. Now, they are forcing 1,000 from the Haredim people to come and serve. They need at least 7,000 new recruits. They don't know where to get them from. The Haredim refuses to take part. The army is already tired fighting in Gaza and also fighting along the northern front, which is South Lebanon. At the same time, they have problems internally in the West Bank, where they continue to engage in fighting against Palestinians in the occupied territories, in Nablus, Jenin, Qalqilia, Tul Karim, and other areas. So they are depleted in terms of human resources. They need to buy more weapons, and they have depleted themselves when it comes to the Iron Dome. They've lost 6 out of 10 Iron Domes they own because of the attacks that has happened from the northern front via Hezbollah or from the Yemenis and the Iraqis at one point from the northern side. So they are underfunded in terms of human capital. They don't have enough soldiers to fight with. They need at least 7,000 to 14,000 soldiers on the ground to be able to take part in the escalation that's going to happen. And that's why they're banking on the Americans to support them on the ground. But then again, you just mentioned something very interesting. You said they are good in the air. They were good in the air. Hezbollah acquired air defense systems. And of course, if you have an expanded war, you'll have the air defense systems that are in the hands of the Syrians. The Syrians have the S-200 and S-400 that the Russians gave them. And those are very accurate. And if you know, in the past, Syria was able to actually drop one of the Israeli F-16s with the S-200 in 2018. Check it out. So the whole idea is that they don't have an advantage when it comes to the sky if the Syrians and the Russians and Hezbollah take part in this escalated war. Recently, 2 weeks ago, the Israelis tried to breach Lebanon's sovereignty with one of their F-35s and hit one of the towns in South Lebanon. It happened to be in an area where Hezbollah had its air defense systems. They shot at it. Hezbollah knows if they had dropped it, they will directly go into an escalation and Hezbollah will be blamed for that. That air defense missile, the land-to-air missile, actually passed 1 meter to 2 meters away. That's according to the military experts, not me. They monitor everything that happens through radars, right? 1 to 2 meters away from the F-35. The F-35 U-turned and fled back to the Israeli entity, and we had no breaches when it comes to the airspace throughout that night. So that tells you they can actually kill the superiority of the Israelis in the air with that kind of air defense system. And that leaves you with one thing, the tanks. The Israelis always pride themselves with the Merkava, right? Their Merkava tank is the pride and joy of the Israeli military manufacturing business. But they are down in the number of Merkavas, according to their own soldiers, after over 1,200 Merkava tanks had been destroyed in Gaza and South Lebanon, or basically the northern front, according to their own army generals and their own reports that they issued lately. According to our own numbers, there are over 2,000 Merkava tanks and armored vehicles that have been destroyed over the past 9 months. So they are down in the terms of number of Merkava tanks, but what's more important, they're down in the number of the experts who can actually maneuver those Merkava tanks and drive them. So they cannot use Merkavas. They don't have enough numbers to actually do a ground invasion. If they do it, they will be sitting ducks. They don't have enough people to fight on the ground. They will have to rely on the Americans. They don't have air superiority. What do they have? They just have to rely on the Americans. So the Americans basically are entering that they will drag their own people into it. There will be American soldiers killed on the battlefield, and the first coffin that goes back to the US will be the end of the democratic rule because people will be voting for the Republicans.
It's very interesting that both of these assassinations came right after Netanyahu got back from Washington. It's almost like getting a stamp of approval and going back and conducting these strikes. Again, with the elections coming up, is it a smart policy on the side of the Democrats when they know that sentiment against Israel is so high within the Americans to still continue on this trajectory?
I always say this joke, smart and Democrats don't go well together in the same sentence. If they were smart enough, they would have used Bernie Sanders long time ago against Donald Trump and he would have won. Donald Trump wouldn't have won if he had Bernie Sanders facing him. Now they're using Kamala Harris. She is not well-traveled. She does not understand world politics. She doesn't even know where the Levant is at one point, or if you tell her Eastern Mediterranean. That woman keeps repeating the same sentences as if she were a parrot. And at one point or another, she is willing to drag everybody into war, thinking that whatever the result is, she can cap on it by saying, we supported Israel, vote for us. It's a disaster waiting to happen. This whole situation is a disaster waiting to happen, just like basically when they brought Biden into power and they knew that he was senile. The man forgets his lines. Sometimes he blurs his sentences. Like we don't understand what he's talking about. So the whole idea is they know that the ones who actually are bringing Kamala Harris and supporting her, they know that they are going to lose. What's their end game? They have no other solution. They have no other solution. They cannot control Bernie Sanders, so they will never bring him as a nominee. They can control Kamala Harris. They can control Joe Biden. So they are always picking the weakest link. That's why I say the Democrats are stupid. They always pick the weakest among them. Whereas the Republicans, they always pick the one who's the loudest. He doesn't have to be the best, but he's the loudest. Now, I can tell you one thing. Remember the assassination attempt against Donald Trump's life a few weeks back? The one the bullet that went next to his ear. If this happened in October, if this happened in October, actually Donald Trump would have easily won, uncontested. But from now until October, people will forget about it. He will try to remind them, but the impact has gone. The Democrats are capping on the war by October to use it as a push for people to go and vote. Fear factor, supporting Israel, etc. This is how they're going to play it. But how stupid the Americans are, we have to wait and see. I highly doubt that the Democrats will be winning because they are going to drag their people into war. And as I said, the first American that gets shipped back to the US dead because of this war, that's the end of the Democrats when it comes to these elections.
Leila, thank you so much for joining us. It was a very insightful conversation, and we hope to have you back on Spotlight soon.